Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ravi. I'm the co-founder CEO of Zeeve. And today we are having this webinar talking about DAOs. So in the webinar today, we'll covering what a DAO is, how you can create a DAO, what are the different kind of DAOs that we see, but that's a very open concept. And then, what are some of the challenges that we are facing that needs to be resolved for a wider adoption of the concept of DAO. So before getting into DAO, which is a short for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations, first, what we mean by decentralization. So decentralization means that, we are moving the power or the control from center to the periphery. And so if we see traditionally, most of the organizations that we see today, they have centralized power. But, yes, to start with, an organization with central power helps the organization to grow. But as the organization grows larger, bigger, like in this case, if you see the network grows bigger, if the complete power and decision-making resides at the center, it becomes very difficult to disseminate that information timely. And that's why if an organization needs to grow, the power and the control and the decision-making also needs to be decentralized, passed on to the periphery. And then only a network is sustainable. Otherwise, the network cannot grow beyond a certain size. And that's where, vis-a-vis that in decentralization, the power resides at the periphery. Different participants in the network either have got significant power or it may be equal power to all the participants. So that's where, what we define as a distributed network or a decentralized network. Now, what are the key aspects of decentralization? Why it is important? Why decentralization is better than centralization? So one, as I mentioned, if an organization or a network needs to be sustainable and need to be scalable, then you do require decentralized decision making. Some of the core components for decentralization are one, it helps to establish a trustless ecosystem. So this is a scenario where each individual or each participant of the network has got significant power, control, or decision making. And they can operate with certain set of rules which are defined across the network. So such a system becomes a trustless system where you do not need to depend or trust an individual person or the other person for the network to operate, for the network to function properly. And that's where, one of the core tenets of decentralization, especially using blockchain, is creating a trustless ecosystem where you do not depend, you depend on the code, you depend on the set of rules which have been defined, rather than trusting each and every individual entity to do a business transaction. The second is enhanced data reconciliation. And what we mean by this is that, again, what happens in the case of a blockchain-based decentralized network, that the data is shared across the network. Each node on the or participant on the network has got exactly the same copy of the ledger. Whenever new transactions are written in the chain, they are synced up across all the participants in the network. So that way, there is a trust on the data because it is shared across the system. And at the same time, it reduces any chances of failure because there is not just one copy, there are multiple copies of that data. Even if one of the data set is hacked or tempered or lost, still you have got similar copies elsewhere on the network that can be used to create a backup. And so that way you can easily reconcile data. You can make the data available across the parties. The data availability, etc., becomes very easy. And one of the classic use case where blockchain-based decentralized ledger technology has been applied is trade finance. So if you see a classical trade finance scenario, especially international trade finance, there are multiple parties who come together to effect one business transaction. So there's an exporter, importer, there's an exporting bank, importing bank, there are a few intermediary banks, and then there are other intermediaries like logistics, freight forwarders, government agencies, and so on and so forth. Data availability has been one of the biggest challenges. Managing documentation and data availability contributes to the almost more than 50% of the total cost of managing a trade finance transaction. So again, having a decentralized system enables data sharing, data availability, and since the data is validated and verified before it's written onto the network, it reduces the risk of data loss and inaccuracies also. And then minimized system vulnerability. Here the concept is that there's no single point of weakness because it's a network which has got multiple participants, multiple nodes. Data is synced up across everyone. So there's not a single point of weakness that can be exploited to exploit the overall network. And of course, the fourth point where how you can make the better usage or optimum usage of resources, that again becomes very evident in the case of decentralized networks, because here you are passing on the decision-making abilities across the network, and that way there's a better chance of having a cumulative or collective decision-making. So you get a lot of skills and resources that can be exploited and utilized to have better decision-making, better performance, and end of the day, a lot of consistency that happens there. So these are some of the key aspects of decentralization that becomes very important if you think it from the perspective of how to create a larger organization which is highly scalable, where the data is available, and you want to reduce risk, better performance, better optimization. Then in effect, we are talking about an organization. If we can apply these concepts of decentralization to an organization, that is what we call decentralized autonomous organization. So coming to now DAOs. So DAOs, follow or all the tenets of decentralization. Today, if you see the, and I'll cover a clear one-to-one comparison also. But in centralized organization today, as a startup, it's good. But when the organization grows, a lot of biases come into picture. The organization becomes dependent on just one or few people in the organization for all the decision making. And we have seen at times, it's very difficult to grow an organization because it's very difficult to align that vision of the founding team with the rest of the team. So there are a lot of challenges in these centralized entities. And some of those challenges specific to use cases, some of which we'll talk today, can be easily solved or can be better dealt with using the concept of DAOs. So DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is an organization where people come together, they have a common goal, they articulate or objectify those goals, code them into a smart contract, and then the organization runs based on the common set of goals. If any vision, any goals, or any objectives needs to be ratified, again, it needs to be ratified by the whole community or the participants of that organization. So that way, there is a lot of democratic way of making decisions as per the rules, and the rules can only be modified when there is a clear, so there's again another rule, how the set of rules can be modified. So the key components of a DAO are one, it is smart contract driven. By smart contract, we mean a set of logic, a set of business rules that can be encoded into a blockchain. And once you have deployed the rules, then whenever a specific criteria is met, the transaction will automatically take place. So take a classic example of, let's say, automated claim settlement in the case of insurance. Now, today what happens is whenever a claim is due, it's the insurance company which has got a proper intervention to ensure that the claim is given to the insured guy. But in the case of automated claim settlement, let's say you encode a policy into a smart contract. Taking a case of any parametric insurance product like weather-based crop insurance. Now, in weather-based crop insurance, what happens is there's a weather data, and there are a set of criteria which are defined in the policy. Now, the criteria may be that if the rainfall is less than 2 mm for consecutive 15 days, it is going to be very damaging to the crop. Or it's very hot and humid beyond a certain temperature. Based on that, a certain amount of claim should go to the farmer. Now you have got IoT devices which can capture the weather conditions, the temperature, humidity, etc., and they can pass on the data to the smart contract. Now, based on the data coming outside through the IoT devices and the set of rules which are already defined in the smart contract, as soon as the set of data meets the criteria which are defined in the contract, a claim can be automatically sent to the farmer. So this is a simple example of a smart contract driven decision making. Here, in this case, again, that's the whole idea, that an organization is formed based on a certain objective. They have certain goals, and you can define these criteria within the smart contract, and based on necessary conditions or triggers, these a certain set of transactions will take place. And since there is no bias here, there's no lack of so it's highly certain. So you are removing risk out of the whole equation. So that is where smart contracts become the core of any DAO-based organization. Second, as the name suggests, since it's a DAO, the power resides with everyone as part of the network. Now, there may be different ways how this power can be distributed among the networks. It may depend on who has invested more into the building a DAO, but still everybody has a certain amount of power. It may be a minor, major, or equal, depend on how the DAO has been formed. And it is community driven. So all the since all the stakeholders in that organization now has got a say in every decision that has been taken by the organization. So decisions are made collectively. Now again, these decisions, they may have a voting which is equal to each member. They may have a voting which may be proportional to their stake in the DAOs. So for example, let's say there is an organization which has got 10 members, and 5 members out of them has contributed 15% each in terms of, let's say, forming the DAO, in terms of investment. So that they collectively make 75% of the DAO, and then rest 5% they have contributed 5% each, so they constitute 25% of the DAO. So now, as far as decision making is concerned, it may be proportionate to the contribution that they have done or the power that they hold, or it may be that one person will have one vote, irrespective of how much tokens or how much funds they have invested into the DAO. So again, depending on use case to use case, decisions can be taken, but end of the day, it's community driven. Everyone who is participant, who is part of that organization, has got a say in the decision making. This is unlike the centralized organization where there's a clear hierarchy, there's a clear decision making. Yes, some kind of input or feedback may be taken from rest of the team, but largely the decision making reside in the hand of few. Now, let's see what are the different use cases, and especially some of the common ones which are already in place. There are thousands of DAOs today which exist, and I would not say they are completely decentralized, but yes, they are moving towards that, depending on, because when we talk about an organization, we are talking about a lot of complex decision making, a lot of complex transactions. Having everything defined, coded into a smart contract, I think it will take a bit of time. But there are very simple organization concepts which are completely running off using the DAO concept today. So one is grant funding. So we can already see this in action, there are a lot of projects or protocols who have launched grant programs. And in the grant program, they have organized that grant program based on the DAO. Now, what we mean by that is, so let's say you have a grant program where you want to give away $2 billion as a grant to various startups and who are building on your protocol. And there is a certain set of use cases that have been defined. So let's say a protocol wants to promote different startups who are building in the gaming ecosystem or metaverse ecosystem to come and build on that protocol. So they issue a grant program, and that it has got a certain logic, how much grant would be given, what would be the ticket size for each grant, what are the criteria the startup needs to follow, the kind of team, traction, product, etc. And then, you can add voting also on part of it. So everyone who is a subscriber to that DAO or a stakeholder can vote on each and every project. And you can always bring in larger community also to be participating in that. There are a lot of grant programs. Polygon had a grant program where as a community you could vote, upvote and downvote on a project. And you need every startup needs to get a certain number of votes even to qualify to be funded by the DAO. So grant funding is again one common base, and the whole idea is how to reduce risk, how to reduce bias in the case of grants, so that people who are running the grant program as the operations team are not biased toward one participant or the other. So it brings in a lot of transparency, especially the people who have put in the stake, who have put in these funds, or the liquidity providers or investors. So they can be sure. And you can extend this to donation-like use cases. And that's where now the concept of DAO is extending to a lot of platforms who take donations from various investors. And then, they have certain charter or program how they are going to use these funds for the benefit of, it may be, underprivileged children, or it may be for education or for some healthcare purpose. The idea is that how to give more transparency to the people who have invested into the organization, that the funds that they have donated, they will be used for the purpose that has been communicated to them in a rightful way without any bias. Similarly, investment DAOs, again, like for example, in the Ukraine war, certain DAOs were formed. The whole idea was to collect the funds that can be used for either reconstruction or helping out, whichever way. So a lot of investment DAOs are formed where, investors come together and they want to achieve a common purpose. For example, somebody wants to buy a tea, or so purpose-based investment funds, and investors can come in. So they are using DAO structure to do that. And that's, I think, is one of the most common DAOs today, apart from community DAOs, where, different investors are coming together, they pull in the tokens, they have got a certain decision-making power, controlling power, and, how the funds are going to be deployed. And whatever the purpose of that investment fund is, it is ensured that, yes, it is done as per the rules defined or rules agreed upon at the start of the DAO, and to manage the operational decisions also. So investment DAO is one of the commonest DAO. In fact, the initial DAOs were investment DAOs. Third is protocol governance. This again is a very common, if you see the protocols like Aave or Uniswap, where there is a protocol token. So the whole concept of two token came in. One token is which is part of the operations of the platform, but the second is which is the which arrives the value of the platform. So when we talk about the operations or the governance, that is where protocol governance comes in. So they have different tokens. If you are a holder of that token, you have got a right to say in a decision making. So whether what is the roadmap going to be for a protocol, what newer things that they are going to build. So it may be any kind of decisions that can fall under the purview of this, and anyone who is holding those protocol governance tokens would be able to vote on the decision, and the actual decision will be is bound by the voting by different token holders. So There are quite a few DeFi platforms now who are using protocol governance, and this area is something that has picked up very well in last few years, and it is going to pick up. Yes, as you know, with a new platform, of course, the larger number of governance tokens still reside with the founding team or the initial investors. So they're not truly decentralized in that sense, but yes, they are moving towards that. The idea is to give more voting power, more decision-making power to other people, and then slowly as this grows up, of course, we'll see a much more decentralization happening. But conceptually, theoretically, yes, it's excellent, and slowly we'll achieve more and more decentralization also. Okay, so I'll take up the questions after covering this slide. Now, and then apart from that, now I think you've got the basic gist of how a DAO operates. So accordingly, then this can be applied to various other. So in the case of social activity, there's a common interest. Like in the case of investment funds, there's a common purpose. So there can be common interests where people can come together. They are the people who are forming. So I think community DAOs is something very exciting concept where different people come together, and as we have seen, a lot of communities get formed. The initial participants in the community are the people who have played a major role to form that community, and then later on, as more people join in, they also contribute immensely for the growth of this community. And the idea is that they all should be rewarded for that. And that's where again these community DAO structure comes in. And what is going to, because what happens is we have seen, if you've read Animal Farm, the whole concept is that as the power comes in, power corrupts people, and that's where some people take more power within an organization than the others, irrespective of who has contributed more to the growth of the organization. So that is what these community DAOs or DAO comes into help in that regard, where people who have contributed more, they have more power within the organization, because they are the people who have worked together for the growth of that organization. Similarly, there are other DAOs, other concepts which are being formed now. And then, the whole idea is how to move the decision making to the periphery, how to give more power to the people who have contributed, and how people can come together, have a joint wisdom. It's a wisdom of the crowd, so you have better decision making also, and at the same time, less bias and more focus towards the growth of the organization. So I'll take a few questions. One is from Paul: how do we create a DAO that is recognized by law? So now there are a few regulations coming in. Wyoming and US has come up with some regulations to form DAO. There are a few other countries who have started recognizing DAO. So DAO can be registered as an organization. Normally speaking, yes, DAO is something that is encoded rather than a normal registrar of companies. DAO is created using smart contract on the blockchain. But yes, it still needs to be recognized, so that if there are, and there has to be a lot of transactions that will have, will mix with the traditional transactions. So there are a few regulations, and DAO is something Australia is also very coming up with friendly regulations on DAO. So there are quite a few countries now who have got favorable regulations that DAO can be structured. But yes, again, DAO has been comparatively new. It has been there prominently in last 3 to 5 years only. So people are figuring out, governments are figuring out how to give more legality to a DAO kind of structure. Yeah, so one question by Thomas is that how do we ensure that those with majority voting rights? So yeah, so you're absolutely right. And so that is the reason I mentioned that. One is who is contributing more to the network. And normally what happens is in most of the DAOs, your voting rights are directly proportional to the number of tokens you hold. But then we realize there's a issue with that, because when a new organization forms and there's a founding team, there's a treasury, and then there are initial investors. Now, collectively, these three, the founding team, the treasury, and the investors, they hold maximum number of tokens. So then it defeats the whole purpose of decision making when these three are going to have majority of the decisions. So that's why I mentioned that, there's an alternative that for certain kind of decisions, because as we know that for an organization to thrive during the startup stage and reach to a growth stage, of course, a lot of decisions making has to be very fast. Not every decision can be democratic, right? But for certain decisions, a larger community can be involved. Wherever we require more transparency, wherever we require more wisdom of the crowd, wherever we want to ensure that funds have not been misused or abused, right? So to give more transparency to the larger set of community. So then in that case, for those kind of decisions, you can have one vote per person or per wallet holder rather than based on the number of tokens. So that way you ensure that, okay, for some decisions, it will not be dependent on how many tokens you are holding, but everyone is going to vote for it. So that way you reduce the chances of having monopoly coming into picture and controlling the decisions. So one question has been both the examples of media and Granta talking of transparency and participation from community. Why do we need blockchain? Okay, so you're right in the sense that from a structure aspect, yes, it can be done in Web 2 and it has been done in Web 2. It's not that it cannot be done in the Web 2. But how do we bring the desired transparency? We know that today we have non-profit organizations who take donations and then invest that donations. Now, how to bring that transparency back to the people who have donated? With blockchain, since you have data, you have transparency, and once it is encoded, you cannot change it. So there are open smart contracts where all the rules of the consortium are written in the contracts, and it is open for everyone to see. So the level of transparency and trust that a blockchain-based network comes around, that can never happen in Web 2, because in Web 2, even if you have defined the rules, those rules can be easily changed, and it would be very difficult for one community guy to ensure that it cannot be abused. So the problem is that only using smart contracts, you are ensuring that there are certain rules which have been formed. Those rules are being followed in practice, and that is where it happens. In theory and practice, the gaps start coming in. And if I'm a donor, if I'm donating a small amount, of course, I cannot create any influence in the network. So there's a lot of gap between people who have actually donated the funds and the people who are part of the operational team and the actual operations which are happening. So to bringing a transparency and connecting all of them together into a single network, that is where blockchain helps and create better trustless networks as compared to the Web 2 systems. Okay, so I'll move forward to and then take up more questions. The process of launching a DAO. So the concept is very simple, but yes, in practice, it becomes very complex depending on what kind of decisions, etc., needs to be driven by smart contracts. The first is, of course, design smart contracts, design the core philosophy of the DAO, the purpose, and how who are going to be the initial entities and how the new entities or stakeholders or participants will be onboarded. Defining the smart contracts, there are quite a few platforms now that can help you, start a DAO, where you have got a lot of ready smart contracts. You can put in the configuration criteria and you can get started. And then, let's say a DAO wants to have, it's for example, in an investment DAO. So you want to achieve something, buy a football team or any such, or any purpose. So you can then say that, okay, any investor can come together who believe in such a vision or an activity, and they can come together. So there may be a token sale related to that, where tokens can be given to people who have invested into the DAO. And the best part is that everything is done using the smart contract. There's no manual collection of funds and manual dispersal of funds. Everything is happening through the smart contract. You can define how many tokens will be given, based on how much amount has been contributed, what kind of voting powers, what kind of decision-making powers based on different kind of decisions. Everything is encoded into the smart contract. Then people will contribute the funds. They will accordingly get the right set of controls and decision-making. And then, we'll be able to impact all the further transactions of the DAO. And then, these smart contracts can be deployed on different blockchains. There are a lot of DAO platforms who are supporting, so there are a lot of ready Solidity contracts that can be deployed on any of the EVM chains. But yes, this is an open concept. Any smart contract platform, any blockchain that supports smart contract, you can establish or deploy DAO smart contracts and run the DAO organization there. And then depending on how the process has been defined, that is where, of course, there are a lot of complexity depending on how large the organization, the different set of transactions. But yes, you can start with a simple DAO with simple set of transactions and logic, business rules. But as the organization grow, even more decision making can be completely decentralized using complex and more configurable smart contracts. Managing DAOs, Treasury, again becomes very important. So DAOs have got a built-in Treasury. The Treasury means there's a smart contract. Smart contract is holding the fund. And why we say Treasury? Because it's not just one person. So some of the fund dispersal can be done based on certain triggers, which are defined in the contract. So then there is no manual intervention, but not every time this can happen, right? Because some of the decision, for example, in the case of a grant-based DAO, now you have defined the rules, how to choose the right set of organizations or startups whom the grant would be given. That has been controlled by voting power, that has been controlled by the rules defined in the smart contract. But beyond a certain point, there would be a time when manual dispersal of those funds need to take place. So those funds need to come out of the Treasury. So there again, we want the process to be more decentralized so that it's not just within the control of one person. So that's where the concept of multi-signature wallets come in. So you have got a Treasury which has got a multi-sig wallet, and different set of people needs to sign it, maybe 3 out of 5. So there are 5 signatories of that wallet. At least 3 of them needs to sign out on a specific transaction for the fund to move from the DAO wallet to the recipient. So this becomes very important in practice because not every kind of transaction can be written based on an automated trigger. So there are a lot of transactions where some kind of manual intervention would be required, but that manual intervention is preceded by a rule-based, smart contract-based decision making. So this is a landscape. I included this slide just to show that you can imagine the number of tools or platforms or startups who are providing different tools to manage a DAO. So there are a lot of platforms out. There are framework, Gnosis being one of the old and very established framework. Gnosis also provides, multi-sig wallets in the form of Gnosis Safe, like for treasury management. And then there are, a lot of other contribution DAOs. There are a lot of community DAOs. So a lot of platforms where you can easily create the basic DAO without doing much of coding. There are a lot of smart contract as a service also where the ready smart contracts can be used. So, and then, there are some associated tools which are helping you like knowledge management, discussion, Gitbook, etc., where you put in the help documentation and so on and so forth. So the ecosystem is expanding now. People are realizing the value of DAO and how DAO can become the organization of the future. So this is something that is picking up now. But as I mentioned, starting with simpler concepts, more and more complex organizations will again be encoded as or designed on the basis of DAO. So if you see from a advantage standpoint, so this is how traditional organization and decentralized autonomous organizations operate. In decentralized organizations, there is of course a hierarchy. There's a top-down management approach. Information flow again from top to down. Information may flow on both the sides, but decision making largely flow from top to down. And we realize that as the organization grows, cracks start happening in. So decentralized decision making needs to happen within the traditional organization also. In the case of DAO, it has been designed in such a way that there's no central entity. There's a clear demarcation of power, decision making to different participants. So it has been organized in such a way itself. And the second piece is of the trust and transparency. So wherever a larger community is involved, we want people who are trustless people to see. What happens is traditional organizations also operate very well today. But the thing is, they cannot be opened up. You cannot have, when you want to invite people from outside, or you want to open up the whole community, then it becomes nearly impossible managing using the traditional organization structure. So for some of these kind of organizations where community participation becomes very important, I think DAO becomes the only way as compared to the traditional organization. In other concepts where yes, still most of the decisions will be taken by a set of people or group of people, and the community participation is limited, or just may not be on the decision making side, but on the recipient side, there DAO can give a better alternative to traditional organization based on wisdom of crowd, based on more transparency, more efficiency, and lesser risk. So key issues for a future of DAO, of course, the first, like if you talk about the practical challenges, one is the technical risk, because it's encoded through smart contracts. If the smart contracts have not been designed properly or they have not been audited properly, they may have some vulnerability that can be exploited. And that has happened in the case of a few DAOs. And that may lead to loss of funds or some other challenges to the DAO. So again, things have moved very nicely in the last 2-3 years. So many hacks have happened, so many smart contracts were exploited. But at the same time, the technology is improving more and more. People are have taken the smart contract audit very seriously. Now, in fact, most of the newer DeFi platforms or DeFi apps, they are getting themselves audited by 2 or more smart contract auditors to ensure that there are no vulnerability which has been exploited. There's a continuous smart contract monitoring also that happens today. So yes, as we move forward, there will be a lot of smart contracts which have been battle tested and can be reused. So chances of these kind of risks will reduce over a period of time. The second is lower voter engagement. So sometimes, you have open up that every token holder can vote out. And this practical challenge is there in the case of today also. If you take a stock market, if you are a stockholder, you can vote for decisions of the organization. But, most of the times the minority stockholders or shareholders, they don't even vote. They don't even go to the extra step of voting. So that happens in the case of a DAO also, that you may have distributed power across to all the token holders, even people who are holding just 1 or 2 tokens of the organization. But it's very difficult to bring them together for every decision. So there's a low voter engagement that happens in quite a few decision making. Pseudonymity and accountability issues, yes, that again has been seen in some of the cases where it was not known who the actual stakeholders are, and a lot of biased decisions were taken. There are some classic case where in the case of where there was a large investor participation, and how an investor could influence. So let's say just imagine a large investor who is invested into multiple DeFi projects, or they are invested into a protocol project as well as some of the DeFi apps. Now, if there's a pseudonymity and how they can influence a decision of one organization vis-a-vis another, depending on their common participation in both. These kind of scenarios have happened. where, just because of this pseudonymous nature, you don't know who is behind it. Sometimes it becomes a challenge. But as we see that, DAOs will start having more legality. So these issues are I would say, teething issues which are being identified, and then accordingly solutions will take place. And then power of concentration, as question Thomas asked, that's true. If it becomes a simple decision that, your decision making will be proportional to the number of tokens you are holding, power concentration becomes a very practical challenge. But as I mentioned, different kind of decisions can be segregated. Some decisions, there may be a different structure. It can be one person, one vote per one wallet rather than number of tokens. So these kind of challenges can be taken care of. And then there are legal and regulatory challenges. So of course, one is the legality itself, the legal status itself. So as I mentioned, there are quite a few governments who are moving in the direction, because DAO actually is a very exciting use case of DLT. And there's a real value which everyone can see. But yes, legal status need to be there for these DAOs to be formed, whether it be inheritance, etc. There are a lot of use cases where DAO will be extended. Inheritance of assets is another very classic use case that DAO will start taking care of it. But for those kind of use cases where the asset may be real world assets, then of course legal status becomes very imperative before DAO can be adopted on a larger scale. Taxes and registration, of course, again, it comes the same thing. Once the legal status will come in, then rest of the process also needs to be how the taxes, etc. will be managed. Because end of the day, every DAO is operating somewhere, and if there are taxes involved, some business transactions, financial transactions are happening. So all those things also need to be figured out. Then talent management. Again, the idea is how to incentivize users to actively participate in the working of a DAO once the organization has been formed. So that again needs to be managed. Securities regulation, again, how it is compared to a common organization which has got shares or stocks, etc. And so all those things need to be figured out in terms of security challenges also. So, so wrapping up, yes, DAOs is a very exciting concept. A lot of DAOs are already today in existence, and they are operating and they are improving. As I mentioned, most of the DAOs initially formed theoretically they had 100% decentralization, but practically, it was not possible, because when a new startup, new organization forms up, there are only few people who starts it, and they have to have a considerable decision-making power at the start of the organization. As the organization grows, more community participation starts happening. Then at that point of time, you require more decentralization to be there, more transparency in terms of rules being encoded in the smart contracts, etc. needs to be there, so that DAO can actually achieve the level of decentralization where we can truly call it a decentralized autonomous organization. So one question is, how do we handle the physical transactions validation and conflict claims around it? Who holds the authority? So again, it operates like an organization. There are various stakeholders, as I mentioned. So let's say some of the token transactions can be based on certain triggers. So a certain trigger has been defined. For example, take an example of vesting contracts. So today what happens is, if you are launching a token-based venture and you are pre-selling some of the tokens as part of the private sale or a public sale. So you say that you define a vesting period, right? So founders may be owning, let's say 10% of the total tokens or 15% of the total tokens. And they say that, okay, there is our tokens are vested. We won't be able to use these tokens and sell them in the market as soon as the listing happens. Now, how to trust that? Nobody can trust just based on, somebody has said this. So there are vesting contracts where you put in the tokens, and that goes for some of the private sale initial pre-investors also. The token reside in a vesting smart contract, your wallet address has already been defined there. And based on a certain trigger, for example, it is going to be vested equally for next 36 months. So the total token that needs to go out divided by 36, that keeps on is sent to the wallet automatically every month. So those are trigger-based transactions. But then there may be some transaction, as I mentioned, manual intervention may be required. So you require multisig wallet. You again require you need to define that again as part of the rules in the smart contract as to how this is going to take place. So in the case of conflicts also, these are things that needs to be defined. Some may be defined outside the smart contract today, some may be defined in the smart contract itself. As more and more DAOs are going to mature, or these smart contracts are going to be mature, we'll see more complex configurations and rules will be defined in the smart contract. One question is about the data recon. It's said to be the key through multi-copy storage. Won't that increase the cost of how different it is? No, so you're seeing from a perspective, if one organization is handling the whole network or responsible for the whole network, then yes, data cost definitely increases in a DLT kind of structure. But that's the beauty of it. The whole network itself is a decentralized network, right? So then in that case, it's not the responsibility of one organization to host and manage all these different nodes in the network. So that's why it does not make much of a difference. Of course, it cannot be compared with centralized organizations like cloud providers, because they themselves become the single point of failure, and still you do not have the kind of control which you require in organizations where there's a larger community participation. One question, very interesting, I've covered to an extent, being community driven, won't it lead to higher lead time to take decisions? As it may happen that all members or token holders aren't proactive. You are absolutely right, that happens. And that's the reason I mentioned you divide the decisions into different set of decisions, that these are the decisions where you will require a community-based voting. These are the decisions which can be taken by a board which includes only 10 members or 20 members, right? Again, you can define that, okay, for these kind of decisions, you do require 70% voting for or against. In some decision, it may be 50%. So yes, these are all practical things we have been doing in this case of traditional organizations also. Similarly, these things are being defined in the case of DAOs also. So these are some of the practical challenges that are being taken care of, and so there's no one right size, that can fit all. But yes, based on what an organization wants, and you want trust and transparency, but not at the cost of decision making becoming so delayed that the organization itself is not sustainable or competitive in the market. So of course, we don't want that. Right, guys. So I think I've covered. If you still have any questions, you can always connect me with on LinkedIn or Telegram. Join Zeeve again on LinkedIn, Twitter, Telegram. We are very active in these social channels. Join us there. If you have any questions, we'll definitely try to solve those questions. Zeeve, just to give an introduction, we are one of the leading blockchain infrastructure as a service organization in the world. We have a no-code platform that provides automated deployments of blockchain infrastructure, whether it be RPC endpoints to full nodes, archive nodes, staking infrastructure. We support 40 plus blockchain protocols today, so all the major protocols. So if you're building anything in a DApp or a DeFi app, you can always use Zeeve platform to directly connect and on any of the blockchains that we support. We have 24,000 developers already, startups already using our platform, 30 plus large enterprises who are using Zeeve platform to manage. So of course, if you're building your next DAO or any decentralized app, you can always use Zeeve as your infrastructure partner to build your application faster at a more optimized and efficient way. Thank you.